I'm John Travis here in Novato, California on the 30th of September 2020, talking to Barbara Harper in Boca Raton, Florida, where it's after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, we've known each other for likely 20 years. I haven't seen you for a long time.
More.
Longer, yeah, and I can't even remember. But I don't know the history of your origins and what led you to do the work you're doing. So let's go back to where you were born, siblings, parents, early childhood influences, and then trace your history up through present time. So
I come from Midwest roots. I was born in Lima, Ohio.
that's right. Forgot.
Yeah. And
Right next door to Bluffton, where I was born. That was our main shopping town.
exactly. St. Rita's Hospital, as a matter of fact. And
Mm-hmm.
in 1952, and I was the fourth child of John and Ruth Protzman, who had married just before World War II. And then my father was shipped off to land on Normandy. And he fought as an infantryman. And interestingly, I didn't find this out until I was much older, an adult, that he was the communications person for his particular division. And so he carried the typewriter on his back and made the post for his particular division for the Stars and Stripes. And my grandmother had all of the copies after she died, and I went through her things. I found his letters from Europe and his memories and his byline in the Stars and Stripes newspaper. And he was with a group of people that had liberated 2 different concentration camps. And I think that whole experience had played very heavily on his psyche, his emotional and spiritual psyche, because when I would talk to him and say, tell me stories about the war, Daddy, he would say, some things are better left unsaid. And he would never talk about it. My maternal grandmother was a great influence, and she was born in Mercer County, Ohio, which is just on the other side of Grand Lake St. Mary's.
Mm-hmm.
And she went to midwifery school, nursing school, and graduated in 1919. So she was the local Mercer County midwife. And her career spanned from 1919 until effectively about 1963. And that's when her husband, my grandfather, passed away. And she never worked after that, and died of lung cancer with a double mastectomy and a removal of one lung. And it was probably because my grandfather smoked every day of his life from the time he was about 10. So she was a passive recipient of all that smoke. But her influence started 3 months after I was born, because my mother had gone to the obstetrician at the end of June 25th, as a matter of fact. And he said, look, Ruthie, I'm going on vacation, and if you want me to deliver this baby, just walk yourself over to the hospital, and I'll call in and say you're being admitted, and we'll start you on this new drug we have. And it was a derivative of ergotrate, which has morphed into something called Pitocin. And so in 1982, I had a session with Thomas Verney, and I went right back to my birth, and I was screaming in the session, "I'm not ready, I'm not ready, I'm not ready." And I could remember saying, "Stop this, stop this." and, and
Wow.
I was born at 30, just about 37 weeks and 4 days. Um, and it was my excuse emotionally and psychically for always being late for everything. And putting my feet down and saying, I'm not budging. I'm so stubborn. And I turned out to be a cancer, a crab. And so that has followed me until I've done extensive therapy. But my mother was so affected by the drug that by the time I was 3 months old, she got a severe case of macular degeneration and
Mm.
iritis. It's a very little known uh, symptom or what do you call it, side effect of Pitocin, that there can be problems with eyesight. And by 3 months, she stopped being able to see. And and I was shipped off to my grandmother's. And my grandmother took care of me until her eyesight returned. And I didn't know any of this until I started doing regressions and therapy, and then I asked about it. And yes, she had severe eyesight difficulties for the whole first year of my life, and so that made me of of 5 children in my family. I was number 4. None of them have memories of my grandmother the way I do,
Mm.
because she was a caretaker, and so her picture is hanging right above my desk in my
Mm.
office, and it's her graduation picture, because I went to Ohio State University for the first year. That was 1971. I took a gap year after high school graduation and went to Europe and explored lots of different things. And when I came back, I I just couldn't cut it. Uh, it was a very difficult time with protests and anti-war and all of this. So I came back home and I went into nursing school. And at that time, it was transitional from a diploma program to a bachelor program. And I got caught in this little transition that was not quite the bachelor's, but we still had to go 3 years and get the what eventually came out to be an associate degree in nursing. And I happened to go and practice at the same school that my grandmother had gone to in Lima, Ohio.
Mm.
And it had such a reputation in history. It was Lima Memorial Hospital, and it
That's
had
where I
been the
had my wisdom teeth taken out when I was a senior in high school at Memorial. My dad was there all the time. One of my high school classmates is their security officer still.
wow, wow. So our roots go back to that
Yeah.
general area. I used to ride my bicycle from Lima when I was in school. I would ride my bicycle the 35 miles home to my hometown. You know what? I forgot to turn off my phone. So let
Oh, we need a
me,
little classical music here to
yeah, there we go.
nice
Um,
ringtone.
I spent most of my time growing up from about age 6 to till I finished college um, in St. Mary's, Ohio. And the claim to fame of St. Mary's, Ohio is the largest hand dug lake in the world. It was built as a reservoir for the Miami Erie Canal.
Hmm.
And we used to hike the tow paths and ride bicycles. And I grew up on water. And so it's no it's no surprise to me because of my beginnings in nursing. After graduation, I went to Dayton, and I lived in Dayton and worked at Kettering Memorial Hospital. Um, I was thrown out of OB because even though it was a passion of mine, I was always questioning, well, why are you doing that? Why can't we do this? And when I started in 1974 in OB, there were no monitors. The cesarean rate was 5%. We did have a pretty reasonable instrumentation, forceps, caudal blocks, and things like that. Um, but one of my biggest complaints was taking the baby away from the mother
Mm-hmm.
for 12 hours, 24 hours, keeping them housed in the nursery to let her rest and for her to recuperate and then meet your child. Um, and I got canned. I also got canned because I tried to start a union, a nurses union. um, and I suppose I should throw into the mix of my history that when I was 17, I had a brush with what appeared to be an attempted suicide, but it wasn't. I just took too many amphetamines to finish my term papers. It wasn't a suicide attempt. I was just trying to stay up 3 nights in a row.
Oh,
And I had a heart attack and went to the hospital, was taken to the hospital at my request because I couldn't count my heart rate. and and I was having trouble breathing. And by the time I got to the emergency room in St. Mary's, I was DOA. And
mm.
they resuscitated me. And during that resuscitation, I was out of body for what seemed, a couple months, 3 months, I don't know. Um, but it was only about 3 or 4 minutes that that it took them to restore my heart rate and intubated me and get me breathing again. And, and during that time out, um, I, I confronted God and asked whatever this infinite being was. I call it my council of elders, and um, they told me, go back and read the Bible the way it was truly written, not this interpretation of it. And the next day when I was recovering in the hospital, I was in the hospital for 4 or 5 days, and my Methodist minister came and sat by my bed while I was still struggling to get off the ventilator. And then when I was extubated, I told him the whole story. And instead of thinking that I was crazy, he said, I think maybe you're supposed to learn Hebrew. And I was contemplating that and asked him, well, how do I do that? And he said, I'll introduce you to a rabbi in Lima, Ohio. And Rabbi Oster at the Congregation B'nai Israel sat down with me and gave me Hebrew lessons. And from that point forward, I wanted to convert. And I did. I did. While I was in Dayton, Ohio, I converted at Temple Beth Israel and have a certificate that I could potentially hang on my wall that says I'm a Jew. And and I've been very active in my Judaism, and it has led it's crafted most of my life. My passion for social justice, my passion for protecting the rights of mothers and babies at birth. And my nursing career morphed into intensive care, neurosurgical intensive care, cardiac intensive care, open heart surgery. I was an open heart surgery specialist. And in those days, I was confronting the doctors, why are you doing a revas when you could simply change this person's diet? And Dr. Bezorgi at Good Samaritan Hospital in Dayton, told me, it's easier to change the parts than it is to change someone's attitudes and beliefs.
Mm.
And that got me onto a path to study yoga, be a vegetarian, and move to California. so, so I could be a, a hippie. And I tried San Francisco for about 6 months, but it was way too cold. So, and my last day as an intensive care nurse was in Monterey Bay Hospital. And I just took off my nursing cap and said, I'm done with this bullshit. I can't do this. And I drove to Santa Barbara, another saint. I drove to Santa Barbara, and that's where I lived for the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I was introduced to midwifery. But I was also a pediatric nurse specialist, and I worked for a wonderful physician named Richard Shamus, who had a holistic practice. And because of that, I was on the board of the American Holistic Nurses Association, and that's where you and I first met, because we had a combined conference between the holistic doctors and the holistic nurses. Do you remember that? I think it was in Missouri.
Was that at Norm Shealy's place? Yeah, in Springfield. Oh, yeah. And
Yeah,
I didn't realize you worked for Rich Shamus. You know, he was in Mill Valley when I
I know.
arrived. And
Yep.
through him, I met Don Ardell and Joy Holloway, and I interviewed him. He was one of the first people I interviewed for this project. So I hadn't remembered that connection either. Wow.
Yeah. Rich and Kara Lee hired me to be their
Uh-huh.
office nurse. And he paid for me to go to massage school. I took courses in iridology. And of course, I studied with Sri Swami Satchidananda and became a yoga
Mm-hmm.
teacher. I had this holistic background and started projects in Santa Barbara, like the Inward Journey with a beautiful man. That's where I met Stephen Longfellow Fisk,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just such an interesting time. And while I was doing all this, I also met my second husband, Harry Kislevitz, and he and I had 2 children. I had a previous marriage in Ohio that didn't last very long, but I did have 1 daughter out of that. So I have 3 kids. And the hospital experience in 1978 in Dayton, in the hospital where I was working, was so horrendous and so traumatic that I left my body during the birth and swore I would never even have sex again if it yielded a pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
It was just it took me years to recover from that, in the sense of everything that was done to me. And my mission that I have published, and when I published my book in 1995, the first edition of Gentle Birth Choices, my whole reason for writing this was to change the way we welcome babies into the world,
Mm-hmm.
because the influence on the psyche of this newborn is so permanent and so
Profound. Yeah.
profoundly impactful.
Mm-hmm.
And everywhere in the world that I've had the privilege to go and to teach, um, the thought is it's my responsibility, if I'm the midwife or the doctor, to get the baby out and make sure they breathe. That's the way obstetrics and midwifery has been taught. And I want to flip that and say, it's your responsibility to recognize the innate capabilities of both mother and baby to birth the way they have to birth, because this child has to accomplish its Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just like everybody else. And it has to accomplish that through the birth process. It's programmed and wired in its brain for birth, and it's programmed in and wired in its brain for connection. And if you interfere with those two programs, then those neurons just disappear. And there's going to be an empty space in that brain, no matter what you do. You know, and I love Ray Castellino and have worked with him early on in Santa Barbara, worked with Mary, Mary. My,
I know you mean.
Yeah, I'll think of her in a moment. She was wonderful. And she called me up years after I left Santa Barbara and said, Barbara, you were right. The baby's a conscious participant. That was the aha. You know, it was truly the aha that led me to have a water birth in 1984 with my second pregnancy, second child. And the journey from nursing school to intensive care units and then coming back around and having that session in 82 with Thomas Verney. I fortunately have kept all of my journals over the years. Even though I didn't want to move with them another time, I've kept those journals, and I've seen the progression of that thought. But the thought was there very early on. Even as a teenager, 1965, I said, somebody's got to, I was 13 years old, somebody's got to change this system. The system sucks.
Sounds like a book, your journals.
It could be. But the...
I want to go back to your birth. What you, I'm guessing you weren't nursed if your grandmother was taking care of you, and that wasn't what we were doing in those days? Or?
The first of 5 children, I was the only one that was nursed.
Oh, well, good for you. And
for the first 3 months until my mother couldn't see. And then all of a sudden one day, boom, it's gone. So,
yeah. Now, I was in the hospital nursery for, I think, 10 days or 2 weeks in those days. They might have eased up on that by their 50s, 9 years earlier. Do you know what the disconnection was in the hospital nursery for you?
It wasn't as long as it morphed into in 1952. Most of the babies were just taken away and bathed and hair combed and swaddled and put into the little box and brought out to their mothers pretty quickly. And then they were taken back. And my mother was told in the hospital that she had to take the pills to dry up her milk. And my mother was defiant as well. That's part of where my defiance comes from.
Good for her.
And she basically said, get your hands off that baby. I'm going to suckle her like a pig and you can just leave the room. So, she told me that story. So
I wonder what changed her mind if you were the first one.
she was fed up with it. Plus, I asked her about that later in life after I started doing the midwifery career, and she said they were so poor they couldn't afford formula. Um, and being the fourth child, and my father had graduated from Findlay College with a degree in engineering and drafting, and he was on the low totem pole at a firm in New Bremen, Ohio, and at an engineering firm, and he was probably making maybe $120 a week, you know,
Wow.
if
And
that much.
commuting from Lima, I've heard of New Bremen, but I don't know where it is. You had to go through Bluffton to get to Findlay.
Exactly. So they were poor, and at that point we lived on a farm out in the middle of the countryside, and my mother was a stay-at-home um,
Mhm.
person, and
And,
uh,
the,
she didn't want to buy formula.
and your three older siblings, what were they age-wise, genders, and
The oldest, I was born in 52. My next up sibling was born 3 years earlier. My sister was 5 years older, and then my eldest brother was 7 years older.
Mhm.
And so they were pretty close together. They were 2 years apart. So, and then they took a break and had me, and I was unplanned as it turned out, and not very wanted. And that was that I in working with regression, I remember them all looking into my crib or onto the table where I was being changed and saying, having the thoughts, what's she here for? You know,
Yeah.
why do we have to have her? And then suffering. I just took the ACE test the other day because I was applying for some grant, and I had to give an ACE score. Um, on a childhood experiences, and I ranked a 7.
Wow.
Be- yeah, because my parents, there was a fair amount of violence in my home,
Mm. Mm.
um, and my two older brothers were tortured me,
Mm.
physically, emotionally, and occasionally sexually. So,
Wow.
um, and mostly my oldest brother, who also had been tortured and sexually abused. So,
By your parents or an uncle or
school bus driver.
oh,
Strange, but after you've done how many, a couple decades of therapy, you finally have a few breakthroughs. So I I think that part of my career, well, I know that my um, my life had a direction of healing. It's always been about healing, and the projects that I've taken on have all been a bit about healing and
mhm.
and establish connection. And so the the adage that we teach what we need to learn,
Yeah.
um, and I'm a good example of that.
Yeah,
So,
that's one of my bylines. So I'm curious, with your older siblings, are they still alive or do you have any contact with them or
um,
dealing with that?
my siblings were very successful in everything that they've done, and I'm my youngest. I have one after me,
Mm-hmm.
and he was a perimenopausal baby that my father decided to abandon completely. because he didn't believe it was his, but he is the spitting image of my father. My father was going through an identity crisis at that time, so that was on the ACE score. You know, did you lose one of your parents while you were still a teenager, you know, be under the age of 18? And yes, I did. I lost my father when I was about between 13 and 14. And he walked out of the house one day to buy cigarettes and never came back. It was that veritable story, you know. But the drive and the judgments of mostly my father, but also my mother. She was driven for us to be successful, and with that drive, there was a lot of punishment as well. You know, like if you were fighting with each other, your punishment was to go to your room. I don't want to see you. I want you to read for the next 3 hours. You
Oh,
know?
too bad.
Yeah, and I was like, hey, you know, um, you know, and pretty much I lived at the library, and my first paid job was librarian in St. Mary's, Ohio, making 50 cents an hour to shelve books, and taking home the books that were banned by the city council.
And reading them.
Yes. And I got expelled from school when I brought Lolita to school. So, so
And I got to ask you, if you were in Lima, if you ever went to the Kewpie.
of course, who didn't?
You
With
remember?
their hamburgers with those grilled onions and the Kewpie cones.
Well, my favorite was the Frosties, and I just
Frosty, yeah,
learned that
yeah,
Wendy's tried to buy the Kewpie, and they wouldn't sell. There were 20-some Kewpies all over Ohio and Indiana, but the
yeah,
Lima one is the landmark one with a
yeah,
turntable. You remember the turntable in the back of the parking lot, so cars could turn around on this turntable.
yeah.
It's not there anymore. The last time I checked, about 10 years ago, it wasn't there. But anyway, I couldn't figure out why I loved Wendy's Frosties, but I got addicted.
Exactly. My most interesting job between a summer job was working for a competitor of Kewpie's, that was kind of on this a little bit on the south side in the racially segregated Lima, Ohio,
Very
because
much so, yeah.
yeah, and I walked into this. I answered an ad in the newspaper to be an ice cream truck driver.
Hmm.
And I had to show up at work at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I worked till 11 o'clock at night. And I had my own truck, and I filled it with, you know, all of the ice cream treats and that particular place. And I cannot remember the name of it right now, but it was, they were famous for their ice cream sandwiches because they had soft serve, and I also had to do that, make the ice cream sandwiches and put them in the freezers, and when I wasn't driving the truck. That was a summer job. So I devised a schedule of driving out and going down the newly constructed I-70 or I-75 freeway,
The
and
bypass, I remember that being built, yeah.
and stopping at all the bypasses and overpasses,
Hmm.
and selling ice cream to the workers. And that was very successful. And then I would go on and go to all the way down to Sydney and Piqua, almost all the way to Dayton. And I went around all the neighborhoods during the day, and I would stop at grocery stores and buy Pepsi and Dr. Pepper and 7 Up, and put it in a cooler, not for me, but to sell it for 50 cents a can when I could buy a six pack for like $1, you know. And and later on in the summer, I was also selling pot out of the back as well.
Oh, wow.
So because my friends had come back from Vietnam, and he had packed his stereo with seeds inside the speakers,
Uh,
and we planted an entire cornfield with seeds, and we had grown the seeds and seedlings and stuff like that, and it grew to be like 8 feet tall, and we had to harvest because it got higher than the corn stalks. And my participation in that experiment in horticulture was 30 pounds of raw
wow.
raw weed, and and that summer I earned enough to pay for my entire expenses for college for the next 2 years. So
Well done.
it was an interesting time. Yes, definitely.
Right there
So
in Allen County.
Allen County, Ohio, yes. And I got evicted from my apartment in Lima by the landlord because one of my study partners in nursing school was a returned veteran from Vietnam, and he was Black. And my neighbors reported me uh, because he would come up the stairs. I had an upstairs apartment. He would come up the stairs and we would study for a couple of hours, and then he would leave. And the third time that he came to study, there was a knock on the door, and I was evicted for having a Black person in my
Hmm.
apartment.
And this was what, 70?
1972.
Wow, in Lima. Hmm.
Yeah. So I hope we have progressed, but um, I understand Black Lives Matter so
Yeah,
much
yeah.
for many different reasons. And
Well, thanks for filling in the other childhood. Oh, in terms of your other siblings, are you in contact with them or what?
oh, I speak to I speak to my sister probably 3-4 times a week. She's a retired attorney. She
Hmm.
was the head of the Department of Corrections for the state of Montana, and with that came the Assistant Attorney General designation. And she retired. She's 5 years older. I'm in my 69th year, and she retired, I think when she was 69 or 70,
Mhm.
and um, and is now living in California to be close to children. And my brother, my next oldest brother, is a retired MBA from the University of Chicago. He was working for a number of big consulting businesses,
Mhm.
and he went back to our hometown of St. Mary's, bought a cottage on the lake, remodeled it, and he's living there permanently
Hmm.
in our hometown and visiting with people that he went to high school with.
Hmm.
And he's head of the Rotary, he's head of the historic, or not head, but he contributes to the Historical Society. He kind of took on that hometown
Mhm.
feel, and he's actually consulting with my business right now. So we
Hmm.
speak frequently. Our
Mhm.
oldest brother um, was he when he retired, he took an early retirement from um, he was vice president of Atari Group,
Hmm.
the Pac-Man,
Mhm.
the whole thing. And his career was through the Air Force. He was a radio operator and radar in the early days when he was stationed first in Turkey in a cave, and then in Greenland at the Thule Air Force Base. And his job, he had gone to language school in Monterey and learned Russian. And his job was to monitor Russian communications through this new thing called computers. That was in the 60s. And so he came out of that with all this computer knowledge and eventually started working for Atari and worked his way up into vice president. And when they got bought out by Time Warner, he took his stock and took an early retirement. And he went into hiding because he was afraid of what's happening now. He was the first voice of what became Snowden. He was, because he was CIA, he knew what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
He was behind the scenes, and he said, they're going to take over. There's not going to be anything private. And after that, he wouldn't own a computer. He's never had a cell phone. We've tracked him down a few times. We think he's living in Phoenix,
Wow.
But he's incommunicado. So we have an interesting family. And then my youngest sibling works for IBM. And just turned 55.
And your kids, what have?
Oh my goodness. My daughter works for WIC, Women's Infants and Children. She is part of an office in Clackamas County, Oregon. And I talk to my daughter every day. And she's been working for WIC for 15 years, and went to college for social work. And so she sees the worst of the worst of government-funded programs, and the fact that the US government is the largest purchaser of formula in the whole country, $8.2 billion a year for WIC, and it's passed out for free. So we have discussions about that, about what WIC could be. And then my oldest son, who was born in '84 in a home water birth, where I turned to my midwife the night that he was born and said, "Oh my God, I just had an orgasm." And that was the easiest thing I've ever done. It was just amazing. And I was teaching a seminar about water birth in my living room with him in my arms 30 days later.
Wow.
But I had gone to France to study at PTVA and in Lille, and met Frédéric Laboyer and talked to him about water birth, and took birthing classes in France, and then came home and told my obstetrician that I was going to have a home water birth. And he accused me of child abuse and said, if I dare do that, he would have me arrested and have my child taken away because I didn't deserve to be a mother. And I called his office. I still went in for visits. And when I went into labor, I didn't call anybody. I just labored alone until about 5-6 hours afterwards. And then I was in a panic and started calling my midwife, couldn't find her. I had invited 15 people to my birth. I had built my own tub out of PVC poles, waterbed fabric, and carpet remnants. And I filled it and kept it warm. I had a water birth, or a uh,
Waterbed heater?
waterbed heater
Yeah.
underneath
Hmm.
everything. And I kept giving myself orgasms in the shower to keep the labor going because I didn't want it to stop. But when I went to find everybody, I found out the next day that the Dalai Lama was at UCSB campus in Santa Barbara or in Goleta, and everybody that I invited, including my husband, was at there, and we had no cell phones, we had no pagers, and nobody called me and told me. so so I took myself to the grocery store, bought supplies for all 15 people that were coming, stopped at the florist, ordered $500 worth of flowers to be delivered to my house, and it looked like a funeral parlor when they they delivered everything, and made sure the tub was warm, and I was in labor the whole entire time that I was doing that. My husband finally walked in around 8 p.m. I started labor at about noon, 11 a.m. And then my midwife showed up. I had left a message on her answering machine. She showed up at about 10:30 p.m. and I was already 8 centimeters, and she broke my water. I got in the tub, had a baby 20 minutes later, and turned to her and said, "Oh my God, I've just had an orgasm." So that child was a grand alignment baby. And if you know anything about astrology, if you don't, I'll tell you, a grand alignment is where every single planet is in the same house and they're all conjunct with each other. So you have a completely empty chart except for one house. And his was in the fifth house. And um, I had somebody give me a 20-page handwritten um, um, present of his astrology about 6 months after he was born. It was some famous astrologer in New York had written it all out. And he said he's either going to be like um, Charles de Gaulle had a grand alignment that was similar. Johnny Carson had a grand alignment that was similar. And Rockefeller, not Nelson, but the oldest one, the Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, had a grand alignment. I said, "Oh, he's going to be rich, funny, and a general." So, but he is definitely funny. He is one of the kindest, sweetest, most affectionate human beings on the planet. And he is the best father I've ever seen. He has a 2.5-year-old son who is already counting to 30 and reading and um, having conversations and singing songs. He knows music, and that's pretty much due to COVID because Sam stayed home with him, and because he runs his company. He's an engineer, and his company makes one machine. It does PET, CAT scan, MRI, and X-ray all in one machine for
Wow.
lab animals, and they sell them all over the world for cancer research.
Mm.
And he's the vice president of the company, and so he stayed home. He's still basically staying home, and he had his son Thomas with him 24/7, and so um, during naps he would work, and at night he would work, but during the day he spent all of his time connected to this child, and has done that since day one. He's the one that wore him. His mother is an aerospace engineer with her master's from Johns Hopkins, and she still had to go to work. She had to work on a government project, and she did manage to breastfeed for 2 years,
Mm.
and they've had such an amazing partnership. And to see him in action, and they called my grandson at 2.5 says, "Call grandma, I gotta see grandma." And so we do this. We do FaceTime and WhatsApp and Zoom, and he runs around the house showing me stuff and singing, and so
Where do they live?
in
In
El
Santa Barbara?
Segundo, El Segundo, where all the major aerospace uh, uh, companies are.
That's LA area, isn't it?
LA, just south of the airport.
Yeah.
My grandson knows every single airline and the logo on every single plane. So if you ask him, what's on Alaska? What's the logo of Alaska Airline? He'll say you a man. You know? If you say what's on the tail of the United, a globe. And my third son, who was born in water in an outdoor hot tub on November 26, 1986, he is extremely talented. And as an artist, as a creator, as a producer, and he's the media director for GoPro cameras and has been working for GoPro since they were a startup.
Mm.
And he came on. Both my sons were hired by their current companies while they were still at USC in Los Angeles, and they started working right away. And Abe just was doing the job of 5 people, and he called me and said, "Well, they've offered me stock. They can't pay me what I'm worth, but." And I tried to talk him out of it. Look, you can write your ticket. You can write. He said, "But I really like Nick Woodman. I think he's genuine. I think he's real. I love the product," because Abe had been making videos for the USC ski team and snowboard team. He'd been making all these videos like Party in the Park, and he had some fame already on YouTube. And now GoPro has over 1 billion subscribers on YouTube. 1 billion. There was a big thing 3 years ago when they hit 1 billion, 1 billion subscribers. And Abe is constantly working. He edits, he creates media. He's an influencer. And he just wants to make people happy. He wants people to live their authentic life and film it while you do it. So he sends me GoPros, and then I struggle to learn how to use them. So, but he's one of my biggest fans. They all are. They all love their. I just talked to him yesterday. They all call me. They all
sweet.
protect me and teach me how to use Instagram, and it's just been a pleasure to be their parent. I was a single parent because I divorced their father in 1989 and decided I didn't want anybody to interfere with how I raised my kids. And I think all it takes is one devoted parent who is not insane, who's working on themselves and being honest to raise really valuable human beings, that they see their own value. And when I tell someone that my son Sam and I have never, not once in his whole life, he and I have never once had an argument.
Wow.
Not once.
He's the grand alignment one.
He's the grand alignment one. He has a temper when he wants to use it, but he's compassionate. He's loving and kind and gentle. And his birth is the reason I do what I do.
Yeah. Well, now let's move into your transformation and doing what you do and how that came about. And are we still in Santa Barbara? I think we're.
Yeah, Santa Barbara. I moved there at the end of 81 after a horrible, horrible divorce and custody battle. And I worked with Richard Chamas and had my holistic blossoming, and met, oh, and while I was there, I'm and working for the American Holistic Nurses Association as the Western States representative, I discovered the Krishnamurti Foundation and the Ojai Foundation. And the head of the Ojai Foundation was a wonderful woman named Joan
Joan.
Halifax.
Yeah, yeah.
And I came to her and I said, wow, I really want to take some of these courses. But I don't make that much working as an office nurse and a massage therapist. And I have a proposal for you. I'd like to take your workshop formats. I see the literature, and I said I'd like to take just a few of the workshops and take it back to my office and turn it into medical ease. Let's say, for instance, the Shakta Tulku Rinpoche is teaching the Book of Poa on how to help someone transition from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and be witness to their transformation from body to spirit. I said, how about if I take that, your whole language, and I take it back and I turn it into medical terms, and then we take my mailing list for the American Holistic Nurses, because the AHA, American Holistic Nurses Association,
HNA,
yeah, had purchased the mailing list of all the nurses in California. And I proposed this to her, and I proposed it as a volunteer just so I could attend classes. And she looked at me and she goes, well, what are you not capable of doing? And I had to think for quite some time, because I felt, okay, I was 30, I was living in Santa Barbara, I was living my dream life as a holistic practitioner, and I said, I'm not willing to grovel, and she and I are friends to this day. And I've been out to Upaya. I've taken courses at Upaya on compassion and Buddhist meditation. And she is my son Sam's godmother. And so I started working for the Ojai Foundation as a volunteer. And one way or another, that's through that connection and another connection, I kept running into Harry Kislevitz. And Harry Kislevitz was a very charismatic Jewish man, and I was fully fledged Jewish. My name was Bronstein at the time. And he came up to me at one of these meetings and helped me on with my coat and whispered in my ear, "You are the sexiest Jewish woman I've ever met." And I turned right around and slapped him in his face and said, "You, I can't even express what I'm feeling right now." And I stormed off, and we got together. We made two babies, and we lived together until 1989. And I could go into why we separated, but let's put it this way: he couldn't focus on one marriage, you know. But we had an amazing time, and his encouragement took me, and his wealth, because he was the founder and creator with his ex-wife. He created a toy that was very popular in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, called color forms.
Mm.
And these were these were boxes, circle squares, triangles, rectangles, and different colors with different backgrounds. And he met up with Walt Disney, and met Walt Disney, worked with Walt Disney when Harry was still living in New York, and started licensing Disney characters. First it was Mickey Mouse, and then it was the whole troupe. And so he made a child could take the box and make their own cartoon. It had a cartoon background, and then you just put the characters wherever you wanted. And the two things stuck together. You could stick them on windows, you could stick them on mirrors, you could stick them everywhere. And it was his invention.
Mm.
And he made millions. And when I met him, I had no idea. Even when we got together, I didn't know what his net worth was. He was 56, I was 30. He was fun. He was the most gregarious person, and he could run circles around me. And he believed in everything that I wanted to do. And he kept begging me for a child. And I said, "Nope, one's enough. One's enough." He loved my daughter. He said, "No, no, I want a baby. I want a baby." And in Richard Shamus's office, I met a woman who was pregnant with her sixth baby, and I think I was immunizing her child, God forbid. But I asked her, "Where are you having your baby?" Thinking she was going to say Goleta Valley Hospital or St. Francis Hospital, the two hospitals in Santa Barbara. And she said, "Oh, I'm staying home and having a water birth."
Mm.
And I was like,
What?
"What?" And I remember I dropped my pen, and I went to pick it up. And by that time, she had gotten something out of her backpack and handed it to me. And it was the National Enquirer. And on the cover of the National Enquirer was a picture of Igor Tarkovsky in the Soviet Union. And this is 1983. And and then she opened it up, and on the inside were pictures of women having their babies in glass tanks, and the baby was swimming. I found out later that the pictures were all set up. They were not real. But it intrigued me, and I asked her if I could borrow the magazine and take it home and show my partner. And when I showed it to him, I said, "This looks plausible. Just think, the baby's going from fluid into fluid. The fluid is the exterior fluid is body temperature. The baby has no sense of changing environment and can't breathe until it comes up and hits the air pressure and the gravity." I said, I want to investigate it. And the night that she had her baby, by the way, I became friends with her, and I made sure that she had a tub, all the equipment. I paid for everything, all the equipment, and the midwife, um, paid all the fees, and she invited me to the birth, but I was afraid that if I went, I would lose my nursing license, because that was the days that they were hunting down um, midwives who were nurses and prosecuting them. Um, and so I stayed home, and Harry and I stayed up and played ping pong till late in the night, waiting for the call that she had had her baby. And we made a baby that night.
Mm.
I gave him permission. I gave myself permission not to use birth control that night. And I got pregnant right away, and I knew immediately that I was pregnant. It was a conscious conception.
Mm.
And so my son Sam is 9 months younger than her son.
Mm-hmm.
There are some mitigating factors in there that I can't share online. So, but just put it this way, that was an adventure.
Uh-huh.
And then as soon as I knew that I was pregnant, I got introduced to a woman named Binny Dansby.
Oh,
And
yes.
Binny was doing rebirthing and conscious conception, conscious birth. And Binny started asking me to come to some births with her, because she had no nursing background. She was a designer, and Binny to this day is still one of my best friends. And she came into our house, and Harry and I both did consciousness work around conception and birth, and she was the one that had suggested that we go to see um, Thomas Verney.
Mm-hmm.
And she was going up to Toronto to the first convention, or had already been to the first convention. I think it was 1983, and she told me all about that.
The APA, what became APA?
First, what became APA, yeah.
For our viewers, that's Association of Pre and Perinatal Birth and Psychology, or APPPAH.
Yeah, Psychology and Health. And
health, yes. What did I say?
Yeah, so I became a member of APA from that, and my previous experience with Thomas Verney and reading his book, The Secret
Life of the Unborn Child.
Secret Life of the Unborn Child,
Yeah.
and also having read Joseph Chilton Pierce, and everybody. There were quite a few in my educational course during those first few years in Santa Barbara. And I still can't think of Mary's last name, but I will.
Jackson. It's
Jackson. Mary
yeah.
Jackson. Yeah. And then meeting the midwife for this other woman, and then for me, for my pregnancy, was Ananda Zarin. And Ananda Zarin was also a nurse, raised in Philadelphia. She was Jewish. She was an initiate of Sri Swami Satchidananda. I was very involved with them, and went to Yogaville, and I got asked to start teaching about water birth after I had Sam, because I had gone to France. I'd seen Pithiviers. I hadn't met Michel Odent at first, because he was gone. He on the very same day that I went to PTVA, he was in Santa Barbara for the first time. We had passed each other. I went Santa Barbara, New York. We stayed for a week in New York. And then Harry and I together, we dropped off my daughter at her father's house in Dayton, Ohio. And then we went on to Paris and kind of had a honeymoon there. Had a honeymoon in Deauville. And I met Frederic Laboyer, who just happened to be visiting Paris at that time. He still had a house there, but he was living in the UK. And I stayed in Pithiviers for 2 days and saw births and saw the huge wall of pictures of water births, and I knew it was okay. I knew it was all right. Dominique Perret was the midwife there. And when I begged to go in and see a birth, she said, absolutely not. Your presence would disturb the mother. She doesn't know you. You're a stranger. And then I cried and I got out my American Holistic Nurses Association card, my CPR card, my Red Cross card, my nursing license from California. I said, but I'm qualified. I'm qualified. She said, the only thing that would qualify you to be in that birth is if you were that mother's best friend. And it was like, oh my God, she's right. We've got this wrong. So the whole experience in PTVA just turned my world upside down. And I did watch a birth. She finally let me in after many tears. I was sobbing and I was 6 months pregnant and she was afraid I would do something, you know. But she told me under no circumstance, she went in and talked to the mother and the mother said it was perfectly fine. She said, you have to sit in the corner and have no eye contact with this mother. You are a fly on the wall. You don't deserve to be there. And I sat quietly and I watched this mother get out of the pool, and the midwife spread a sheet on the floor. Her husband held her from behind and she semi-squatted, and Dominique put her hands out, never once touched the baby until it plopped into her hands. And then she put it down on the sheet and the mother sat down behind it and started petting it like a kitten. And the baby, after an interminable amount of time, started mewing like a kitten. And then the mother picked the baby up and went, and I've seen that over 1,000 times. Over and over and over and over, out of the water, in the water. It was not until women started showing up at my door in 1985, after Sam's birth, because I was very vocal about it. I went on ABC News, I was on the morning show, I was in Santa Barbara newspaper, the LA Times, all of that. I could not stop talking about water birth. And women started knocking on my door and saying, will you help me have a water birth? Okay, this is what you have to do. This is what you have to do. Da, da, da. And here's the midwife. But we want you there. And I started welcoming women into my house, and they had their babies in my hot tub, which I had installed in my dining room. I took the dining room table out, put a 12-person hot tub with a gas line into the dining room, and we used it as a buffet table with candelabra when there wasn't anybody in it. And I had the the dining room table at a different place in the house. This was a beautiful house in Montecito, California. And I started teaching classes in my living room for parents and for professionals. And some of those professionals that came to my very first class are still friends
Mm.
in 1985. And a doctor named, uh, um, he had two first names, Gordon, Dr. Gordon in Santa. Um, I can't remember his first name at the moment. Um, After I had advertised that class in the LA Times and in the Santa Barbara News Press, I just had a little, want to know more about water birth, come to this class, And I still had the mailing list of all of the nurses in California, and I sent out an invitation. and, and I got a nice sprinkling of direct entry, what we then called lay midwives, and one doctor. And then in the mail, I get a paper, I get summons to for a lawsuit that I was being served for committing fraud by the Bureau of Registered Nurses. I had not changed my name with the Bureau of Registered Nurses. I had changed my name legally in the court in Santa Barbara to Harper. Harper was my grandmother's maiden name.
Mm.
And Kislovitz was too hard to spell.
Yeah.
And Bronstein was also, nobody pronounced it right. So I changed my name legally to Barbara Harper. And I got sued by the Bureau of Registered Nurses for fraud. And well, actually, I got sued by Dr. Gordon for fraud, and because he had looked me up in the Bureau of Registered Nurses. Who's this person? And I didn't exist. Barbara Bronstein did, same birth date, same social security number, all of that. And so I had to fight that. And that was just the beginning. At every turn, we were pitted against each other because he was head of the obstetric organization in Santa Barbara County. He was head of OB. And I started studying midwifery, first with Ananda, and then with Marina Alzugaray, who was a CNM in practice in Santa Barbara. And she and I became partners. I apprenticed with her and went to births starting in 1988. And I also, at the same time, in 1987, I took a trip with Harry and my two sons, and we went to the Soviet Union to meet Igor Tchaikovsky. And I filmed him. I have archival film and pictures from his apartment there. And it was like a mecca. People started going there, and there's quite a bit of hyperbole in the stories that have come out of Russia and around Igor Tchaikovsky. And that trip taught me that I didn't want to be associated with Igor Tchaikovsky and the whole Russian milieu of water babies are the smartest babies on the planet, and they can put their hand on a book and tell you exactly what's in it. They're psychic, and they're from the dog star Sirius, and they're a whole new breed of children, and to have a water birth, you have to swim with dolphins and get irradiated by the dolphin energy. And I called bullshit. And okay, remember, I have a medical background, all right? And home birth cannot be associated with that if we want to push it forward.
You want dolphins in your living room.
So in my book, I said, if you want to birth in the ocean with dolphins, hang up a dolphin poster and put on a sound that Gigi Coyle made of crustaceous creatures and play that during your birth, or sounds of waves.
Yeah.
But don't risk your life or the baby's life. So it was an interesting trip in Moscow, and we had paired it with an organization that I was working with in Seattle called MIR. MIR is the Russian word for peace.
Mm-hmm.
And with that organization, thunder, we met
Wow.
we met lots of peaceful people in the peace movement who wanted to bring, it was a citizens' peace movement between the Soviet Union and America. And that year in '87, we met with the head of Komsomolska Pravda, the people's paper of Russia. And by the way, I studied Russian. Both of my older brothers studied Russian, and my first brother, you heard about him. He was fluent in Russian, and my second brother became fluent in Russian because he did part of his study abroad was in Leningrad from the Michigan State University. He has a degree in Russian literature, so and then an MBA in business. But interesting family, definitely. So I studied Russian as well, and the peace mission took us to small towns, and we went to Odessa, we went to Tbilisi, we went to different parts of the Soviet Union. We went to Minsk, we went to Kyiv. So I got to tour all over Russia that summer with my two kids and a nanny in tow.
Wow.
And it was just amazing. And we kept giving out colorform toys and kits. And one of the things that Harry was working on was a project called Future Cities, and he wanted to build a city, and he had the money to do it. He wanted to build a city that was earthquake proof, vermin proof, powered by solar energy, with only walking in the city, or electric bicycles, or small electric vehicles, and that all of the produce was grown for that city organically, and there were people growing sprouts and preparing raw foods. He had the whole picture, the whole entire picture. And so that was also part of the reason that we went to the Black Sea, because we went to Artek. Artek was the largest children's camp. It was a Soviet camp, summer camp. And there were over 10,000 people in this town. And they grew their own food. They had a stocked lake for their own fish. They had their own cows. They made their own cheese. They did their own yogurts. They had huge bakeries. They made everything there was handmade and organic and grown at that site. And I taught classes to teenagers on English and peace missions. So we told them what the U.S. was really like, and I told them about my growing up on a farm in Ohio, and I became pen pals with quite a few of these teenagers, And then I told them about birth and the water births and it was just, it was an idyllic time. It was just incredible. And we came back through um, we came back through London, and I gave a lecture at the um, Wimbledon Hall for the Royal College of Midwives about
Mm.
my water birth experience. And I did that also in 1988. And when I came back from Russia, I thought, I have to do something. I have to, my motivation was high. It combined with inspiration, and I had the means. I had the money to be able to found another organization. So I hired an attorney and an accountant and put together the framework for what would become, for 22 years, Water Birth International, which I turned it into something called Global Maternal Child Health
Mhm.
Association. And we got our nonprofit status on February 21st, 1989. And it was it was a success in the sense that, yes, I was the founder and director. And by the time that I gave the nonprofit status back to the government in 2000, when did I give it back? 2010. 2010. I'd already moved to um, Florida. Um, I just didn't have the ability to run it anymore. So I turned it into a um, LLC, and it's we had one of the first websites on water birth. We gave out thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces of literature, mailing packets to people all around the world, every place in the world. And it pretty much came out of my own pocket.
Mm.
And yes, we sold books, we sold videos. I produced a video called Gentle Birth Choices. We've sold, over the lifetime of Gentle Birth Choices since 1994, we've sold half a million copies
Wow, of the video.
of the video.
Wow.
And now we're giving it away. We, well, we started giving it away with the 2005 edition of my book. It was a DVD. It's still in the back of the book. I
Hmm.
told the publisher, just put a code in there so they can scan it with their phone and go to my website and download it for free. You know?
Hmm.
So we've got that technology. That's what they do. That's what I had them do in China. It's the book was translated into, at current, 10 different languages, including Russian, 9 published languages. The Russian one, well, actually 11, because it was also translated into German, but it was done by hand. In Russia, they translated it by hand and made, when it was still the Soviet Union, they were risking their imprisonment for making copies. And then the book was called Water Birth, Water Baby. Water Birth, Water Baby. So, and I became this icon of going against the system. And Water Birth International was successful and remains successful. But today, I have to know Instagram. I have to teach online. And yes, I'm working on 2 new books. And COVID has given me the ability to do that. But we had a rough start, because by 1991, well, on April 9th, 1991, I attended a birth that was not a water birth. It was a home birth. Um, the woman was having her sixth baby, different woman in Santa Barbara. She was up in the foothills, and she called me to come up and to bring a tub. She wanted to discuss with me water birth, but when I got there, she was already in labor, and she knew it when she called me. And um, and I asked her. She asked me if I would check her, and by then I was attending birth solo.
As a
And
midwife, nurse midwife.
as a midwife, as a lay midwife,
Mm-hmm.
a nurse and a midwife. I was no longer afraid of the Bureau of Registered Nurses,
Mm-hmm.
and there were plenty of nurses that were attending births and doing VBACs, and I had taken, I had two different apprenticeships and had worked with Dr. Michael Rosenthal, and he thought I was a rich, bored housewife, and why would I torture myself by going to births all night and all that. But this woman called, and I came, and so I went out to my car and got my birth kit, to get my Doppler and gloves and all of that. And I examined her, and she was completely dilated with a bulging sac. And I said, holy fucking God, you're going to have a baby in like 10 minutes, you know? And she goes, oh, would you stay with me? You know? And then she said, would you break my water? And I said, no, absolutely not. And she goes, well, I'll go into the bathroom and break my own water. And I said, go take a shower, and with your next contraction, it's probably going to break anyway. And a little background: this woman was a transcendental meditation teacher. She and her husband had a modicum of fame, and they held classes. And she also channeled like 12 different voices, and people would sit at her feet and listen to her channelings and all of that. I
Now,
thought
but
they
you
were
weren't already her midwife. You weren't doing prenatal
no,
care. She just
no.
called you out of the blue.
I had done prenatals for her with her last birth with Marina.
Uh-huh.
And Marina and I had transferred her to the hospital for a face presentation. And she ended up having that fifth baby in the hospital. And so she had my number. She knew where to find me,
Mm-hmm.
and she knew what I was doing. And I had attended some of her channelings and all of that. And I thought she was so far out there that the buses didn't go, you know. But okay, was I supposed to turn around and walk out the door and have her birth by herself? She was not going to the hospital. This birth was imminent. And so I put a pair of gloves on, and then she came out of the shower, and her membranes had ruptured. And she said, okay, now I'm going to sit on the bed, and I want you to sit in the corner and do nothing. Because the corner where we have put that chair, that's the vortex of energy in the room. And I want you to hold the space. And I'm thinking, oh God, what have I gotten into? And she sat down on the bed, and she went into this deep, what I call a samadhi. She's a transcendental meditation teacher. And she goes into this, oh, with a contraction. Oh, and then silence, complete silence, and no movement. She doesn't move an eyebrow. She doesn't, not one single affect changes on her face. Her body is limp, and her legs are splayed open, and I can see her perineum from the chair. She did let me, before she went into the shower, I took her blood pressure and I listened to the baby, and everything was fine. And then I sat in the chair and I watched the baby come out. She didn't push once. She didn't have any sounds. She didn't grimace. There was no change. And I saw the head be born, and I got up, and her husband looked at me like,
He's there too, huh?
go back. He's sitting beside her,
Mm-hmm.
and he doesn't say anything. He's in meditation, but he sees me get up. And so I go back and I sit on the edge of my chair and I watch the baby sit on the perineum, the head out. I have a watch and I time it, and it's 4.5 minutes. And then the baby goes whoop, whoop, and plops out. And at that point, I get up and I look at the husband and I'm like, can I get up now? And I picked up the baby with him and put it on her chest. And she's naked. And she opens her eyes and looks down and says, hello, baby. We've been waiting for you. Thank you for coming. Like that. And I go to my bag, get out my stethoscope. I listen to the baby, and the baby's breathing, but it's not making any noise. And this is the first baby that I've ever seen that birthed itself completely and is not making any noise. And so I just stimulate the baby. I go to suction the baby, and she looks at me, no, you're not touching the baby at all. And then the baby starts crying. And well, okay, I did have a prior experience of a baby birthing itself, and that was in PTVA. But all the other births I saw in my nursing education, in my midwifery education, somebody was always hands-on pulling the baby out. And yes, the baby has that Maslow's hierarchy and has a program in its brain. Its first biological imperative is to express the primitive reflexes and be born. And that lesson was an incredible lesson that this woman allowed me to experience. I got her in the bathtub with the baby. The baby latches on, after about, the placenta's delivered, everything's fine. I weigh the baby, measure the baby, do a neurological test on the baby, and I say, I want you to go to the hospital first thing in the morning, or your pediatrician, whoever's your pediatrician, and have an exam, because you had no prenatals. She had not one single prenatal. She didn't even know how pregnant she was. And I get a call, and I leave the house. Baby was born about 10 p.m. I leave the house about 1 o'clock in the morning. They're tucked into bed, baby's nursing. I get a call about 4 o'clock in the morning. The baby's not breathing. What do we do? And I say to them on the phone, get off the fucking phone and call 911 now. That's all I said. And then I hear the baby in the background, and the baby's crying, and it's the father that's talking to me. And he said, oh, we just panicked. Baby's fine. That's baby's fine. I said, do me a favor. Just get in the car and go to the hospital. Please go to the hospital. Do you want me to come? No, we're fine. We're fine. And I go back to sleep. I had been at a birth the day before, and I was kind of catching up on my sleep. And kids get up at 7 o'clock in the morning. And at 8 o'clock in the morning, I get a call from the county prosecutor. Are you Barbara Harper? Yes. Were you at a birth last night? Yes. And the baby died at 7 o'clock in the morning. And they transported the baby to the hospital, not at 4 o'clock, but at 7 o'clock, and the baby was DOA. And then starts this huge investigation. And my current secretary at the time, her husband worked in the DA's office, and he called her and said, "Tell Barbara that she's going to be investigated for criminal neglect, second-degree manslaughter, and practicing medicine without a license, and that she should get rid of all evidence within the next hour." And somebody came knocking at my door, and I sat down and interviewed with them. And it was two criminal investigators. And in that hour before they arrived, I had packed up everything, put it in my secretary's car, and she mailed my computer file, she mailed paper file, she put it in a big box and mailed it to a midwife named Molly Lasser in Chicago. we just got rid of everything.
Evidence that you had been a midwife, you mean?
Yeah, pretty much. But I was honest with them. I said, yes, I had attended this birth. And by afternoon, I had a lawyer in Paradise, California. And he was referred to me because I was the 45th nurse that was from the state of California that he had taken on to defend. And when they came back and sat down in front of me at my desk, I put him on speakerphone. I said, "You don't mind if my attorney comes in on this interview?" And they started asking me questions, and he would say, "Excuse me, my client is not going to answer that. Hello, my client is not going to answer that." And he wouldn't let me talk at all, not one word about my history, my training, who I apprenticed with, whose births that I had attended, none of that. He wouldn't let me say anything. And when they pressed him, he said, "It's very clear what needs to happen here. You need to get the fuck out of her office, and we are done." And so it went to a grand jury. The pending charges were second-degree manslaughter, practicing medicine without a license, practicing midwifery without a license, and criminal neglect. And the grand jury came back without an indictment, and it was dropped. The couple would not testify against me. Not at all.
Well,
At
that's
this
decent.
point, yeah, at this point, I hated them. I was like, "How could you do this to me? I told you to go to the hospital." And she said, let's do a channeling and see what the elders say." And for some reason, I let them do a channeling, and it was recorded. And it was on a little cassette tape. And the channeling said that this little girl, her name was Rose, she was 5 pounds, 11 ounces, born on my mother's birthday, April 9th, 1991, that she had come to bring me this message, and this message only, that the baby is the driver of the experience. The
Mm.
mother can be a passive participant. The mother is the vehicle. And that to embody as a human being, we need to let the baby make the choices. The choices of when to start the labor, the choices of how to navigate the pelvis, the choices of when to work in conjunction with the mother and the hormones that are necessary. Everything has to be in concert. But the baby is the one who chooses. The baby is the one who chooses to crawl up the chest into what I call the sanctuary, that protected sacred space where they then choose when to find the nipple. And it should be their choice when to leave the sanctuary. And we should listen to them, and that we should acknowledge that they communicate in the womb, during the birth, during the ascent to the sanctuary, during breastfeeding, that they send signals and communication is completely intact, that they are conscious participants in this whole experience. That's what the channeling was, that it was done for my edification, and I would take this message out to millions and millions and millions of people in the world.
Wow.
And I resented them so much.
Mm.
And I held on to that tape. Until March of 2009, when I shipped all my things from Oregon to Florida. And as I was packing up to ship the things, I said, enough. I've told millions of people already. I can let go of this. And I looked at it. It was my handwriting on the small cassette tape. And I did a ceremony and got out my abalone shell and my sage and my and I said, I can let go of this now, because on December 24th, 1991, the Bureau of Registered Nurses said, we've had a complaint about you practicing midwifery without a license. And this goes beyond, and you're attending home births. So our only recourse is to suspend your nursing license in the state of California. And I went back to the attorney, and he said, look, do what Jerry Rose did. She was prosecuted during this year and that year, and she moved to Oregon because Oregon doesn't care about your license. You can practice midwifery in Oregon. If you're a taxi driver, all you have to do is go to the Department of Health and learn how to fill out a birth certificate. Just go and go to school up there, get your CNM and pursue your career, publish your book, get that done. Because he and I had gotten so close during this time of fighting the first case, and now over the course of time. So I went to Oregon in November of, well, I moved to Oregon in June, May, the end of May, beginning of June. I was there for my 40th birthday in 1992. And I practiced as an underground midwife, but I also attended midwifery meetings and lectured about water birth at Midwifery Today. And I started researching a book that I would eventually write called Modern Day Witch Hunts. And I gave that title to Marston Wagner, and he wrote a whole article about it. I finished the manuscript and sent it to Kitty Ernst, founder of what was NAC, which is now AABC. And she said, Barbara, don't publish this. It's too angry. It's too us against them. No, don't publish this. And I didn't, I withdrew it. But I had already published Gentle Birth Choices, had already made the film in 1994. And it was my statement that you can have the birth that you want, but you have to work for it in this climate, in this culture. And the Bureau of Registered Nurses extradited me to California. They fought the case, hired so many expert witnesses, depositions, all of that. They pursued it for 7 years. I was not exonerated until 1998.
Wow.
And guess how I got exonerated? The Assistant Attorney General of the state of California took on the case for the prosecution, representing the Bureau of Registered Nurses, and said, we have to stamp out those home birth, And during this whole time, there was a push to get licensing for home birth midwives. And there were as many home birth midwives that were stamped out as there were that got licenses in the beginning. And the depositions against me were that I should have turned around and walked out the door. I should have called 911 when I realized that her bag of water was bulging. I erred, and that was all my fault. And the baby died because I was so reckless and horrible. This is what the case was, and that I should deserve to lose my license. I should deserve to lose all licenses. I should never practice nursing again. I should never practice midwifery again. And the state attorney general sent me a letter in 1998 that said, give up now, because we were fighting it. It cost me well over $25,000 to fight it. And that was nothing, because the state of California said, give up now, and all you'll be responsible for paying are the fines and what we have spent prosecuting you, which amounts to $750,000.
Oh, wow.
But if we go to trial, and they had set a trial date 1 month from now, you will be in for well over $1.5 million, because the trial, we're going to bring in everything and we're going to take you down. And she said in the letter, I will tear your throat out. You will never survive.
Wow.
And after I fell on the floor and went into a fetal position and came out a day later, I faxed it to my attorney. Actually, I think I was only in the fetal position for about an hour, but I faxed it to my attorney. And he called me up and he said, get out the champagne. This is so incredible. I am filled with joy for you. And he made copies and sent a press release to every newspaper in California that the government of California was prosecuting a resident of Oregon. And I had been in Oregon for 7 years, 6.5. And that they had spent $750,000 prosecuting somebody that was in Oregon, not even a California resident. And I was interviewed for the Sacramento Bee. There were a couple of other newspapers because this was all taking place in Sacramento. And within 1 week, I had an envelope that came in the paper that said, your nursing license is being reinstated. But if you ever come to California and practice midwifery again, we can bring the whole thing up. Within 1 week, they restated my license. And I went to the Bureau of Registered Nurses in Oregon. Oh, great. I get to go to midwifery school. Someone had arranged a full scholarship for Oregon Health Sciences University. And I needed to have my nursing license in Oregon, which I couldn't get because I was under suspension in California. And I sat in that office and all the paperwork and everything. And the woman looked at me and she said, but you haven't worked in Oregon.
That's what she knows of.
Oregon is the only state in all 50 states that does not have nursing reciprocity. To earn your nursing license, to renew it every year, you don't have to take CEUs. I took CEUs every year up the wazoo, so I was sure that I would qualify for another nursing license. No, in Oregon, you have to work and you have to show a work record. Well, talk about catch-22. And I looked at her and I was blown away. And she said, I don't care if you have a nurse. And I had renewed my nursing license from Ohio. I had a Colorado license. I had even applied for a Florida license. I said, I'm going to get as many licenses as I can. I don't know where I'm going to move. I still had an address in Ohio. My father lived in Colorado. I just, I was going to be okay. And I looked at her and she said, I don't care if you had a nursing license in all 49 states. If you have not worked in Oregon, you, my dear, have to go back to school and start at square one with nursing.
So much for a progressive state.
Yeah, for that. And they're very hard on professionals there. 1,000 hours of practicum for massage therapist. It's one of the toughest states to be a professional. And I looked at her, I took my paperwork off her desk and I said, well, my real home is in cyberspace. Thank you very much. And I walked out of her door because I told you I was one of the first ones that had a website. And this is already 1998. And I had projects that we'd done through Global Maternal Child Health. I had projects in the former Soviet Union and all the places where I visited. I collected medical supplies and we sent the medical supplies. I sent $14 million worth of medical supplies with a grant from the US Department of Defense to former Soviet states. I packed up and shipped an entire hospital in Sacramento to, where did it go? It went to Minsk. We did Nizhny Novgorod. You couldn't do any major cities. You had to do outlying cities. I got food and supplies for orphanages. We did that, and then I started working through Global Maternal Child Health Association to make a little bit of extra money to do adoptions of Soviet-born children, of Russian-born children in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And what I did, because I could read and write Russian, and I had my Russian alphabet on my computer, I would write the invitation in Russian and for them to get a visa to go to Russia and pick up their baby. And one night I think it was around 2001 or 2002, the Russian consulate in San Francisco, the consulate general called me on the phone, and it was a little shady what we were doing, because I had the stamp from our partner organization in Russia, in Nizhny Novgorod, which was called Evolution, and I stamped these things and then faxed them to the consulate in San Francisco as if they came from Russia. Okay, just a little tiny little bit shady, not too shady. And the stamp had her signature on it, and so that was it. And the consulate general said to me on the phone, and here I am shrinking in my seat, thinking Gulag, Siberia, Novosibirsk, here I come. CIA gets involved, and there were a lot of things that were going on with this whole program. But he says, Miss Harper, we received your latest invitation. I must tell you, I am not pleased. And I say on the phone, "Что? What?" in Russian. He says, "Your Russian grammar sucks. You confuse male and female endings, and I have to correct everything. From now on, would you please make invitation in English?" And I'm like, oh, thank God. Oh, thank God. We managed to place with families in North America over 600 babies. 600 children. That's just a side story of what we were doing with water birth and the tubs, because to me, every single life matters. Every single life. And I hooked up with my APA friends and suggested to the adoption agencies that all these parents adopting babies that were abandoned at birth or neglected, because we weren't allowed to bring babies out until they were at least 9 months to a year old. So all of those children had severe complexes. And so there was a therapist in Florida that started working for all these adoption agencies and taking parents through classes on how to recognize coping mechanisms in abandoned children, like the hair pulling and the head banging and to work with them. I'm not sure what my career is going to be into my 80s. God willing, I should live to be 120. If not 120, at least 100 and feel like I'm 20. Okay. You know what it's like to get older, right? But And I still have a story to tell. Look where water birth has gone. Do you know that Ina May Gaskin, I love her dearly, even though she's a Republican.
And she supported circumcision when I had that argument with her at the Kim's meeting.
Yes. But I cornered her at Mount Madonna when we did the Kim's meeting. I actually slept in the same room with her. And I said, "What's your problem?" She wouldn't let me publish any articles in the Birth Gazette about water birth. She hated water birth.
Really?
She hated it. She refused to acknowledge it. And she said it was an invention, that no woman would ever go to a stream of water and sink herself in it, or a body of water. And I said, "No, you're missing the point. Absolutely." And then her daughter wants to have a water birth. Sheila Kitzinger was the same way. Sheila Kitzinger totally said, "This is bullshit. Water birth is horrible." And then her own daughter had a water birth. So people came around, and there were midwives that wrote me hate letters and said, "You know, if we were meant to birth in water, we'd have gills." Okay, so my mission with Water Birth International was, okay, my global mission is to change the way we welcome babies into the world. My mission with Water Birth International is to make water birth an available option for all women in all settings. And yes, we started doing it at home, but the first hospital in the United States that adopted the practice and had me come in and teach was Monadnock Community Hospital in Peterborough, New Hampshire, 1991. Sparks Family Hospital in Sparks, Nevada, 1991. I forget the name of the hospital, but my friend Jan Erik Stroll is a retired obstetrician now in the Seattle area, and he had done a water birth. He's Swedish, and he had seen it. He had practiced midwifery, and he had interned in Norway, and gone to the UK, and he was in Minnesota, and then did a private practice in Polson, Montana. It was Polson Community Hospital. He did a water birth in 1990. The John Bastier was doing home water births in Seattle in the 1930s.
He's the one that founded Bastyr College of Naturopathy, right?
Yep. Yep. It's been around for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Well, when we were considering my daughter in 93, interestingly, it was a guy who had trained with Benny Dansby in Denmark, who had just moved back to the States, bought our house, and had a water tub, portable tub, that he lent us, because we just moved up to 40 acres in Mendocino. So, and we weren't sure about the actual birth, but my wife was certainly interested in laboring in water, and that alone, that we figured that made it worthwhile. But we did wind up in the tub, and she popped out and looked us both in the eye and ignored us for a couple of weeks. That first contact.
I started a water birth certification course in 2007 when a physician in Minnesota called me. She'd been to our Water Birth International 1996 conference in Greensboro, North Carolina. We put it in conjunction with the School of Nursing. Then we did a 2000 conference in Portland, Oregon, and invited people from OHSU, because in 1998 at Oregon Health Sciences University. I was a keynote speaker at a conference day, and I said, I'm going to teach a course on water birth, but I want the head of perinatology and the head of neonatology to come and give me their objections to water birth. And I sent them all of the literature at that point, everything that had been published. To date, there's over 500 published articles in multiple different pieces of literature, or not magazines,
Journals.
scientific journals around the world, and thousands and thousands and thousands of lay publications, even though the National Enquirer was probably first. But then I sent them a notebook and put the years and all of that. And I had done the very same thing in 1995 and sent it to the practice committee of ACOG and said, this is what's going on. Tell me your opinion. And they wrote back. Stanley Zimberg was then head of the practice committee. And he said, until there are randomized controlled trials with large numbers, there's not enough evidence.
Randomized controlled trials with birth? Come on.
Yes. Oh, and people believed it. And there are, to date, 17 randomized controlled trials on birth and water that we have found. The Cochrane database publishes, and updates every other year or so. And 2018 was the last update. And they found, even with that paucity of RCTs, they found that there was no difference in babies with in those randomized controlled trials between water birth and land birth. That there were no deleterious effects on babies whatsoever. And there have been meta-analyses from many different parts of the world that show the same thing, that is as good as or better than birth on land. So we came into the auditorium. We had the meeting at the Portland Zoo in a wonderful conference room. And it was an all-day conference where I was teaching about water birth. And we had a panel discussion in the afternoon with the head of neonatology and the head of perinatology. And both of them said, I have no objections. We've read the literature, and the literature says, this is 1998, mind you, that it's good. I said, well, what's the stumbling block? The midwifery department at Oregon Health and Sciences University wants to start a water birth program. And the head of perinatology, I'm thinking of her name right now, but she leaned into the microphone and she goes, we don't have a tub. And I took my microphone and I said, yes, you do. I'll purchase one and give it to the hospital. And within 3 months, we had a program.
So that started your tub business.
Oh, and the tub business was fabulous even before that. I was still in Santa Barbara when I started the tub business.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
My first tub was built out of PVC poles, waterbed fabric, and carpet remnants, but it broke the night that Sam was born. I was already on the bed being checked by Ananda for tears, and I was intact. He was 8 pounds, 12 ounces, and he just came sliding out of me like a slippery little dolphin. And, but Harry was holding him in the tub, and I heard this drip, 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 and then whoosh, and the whole tub collapsed. It was 300 gallons of water, a placenta on the bottom of the tub that we hadn't put into the bowl yet, and all the little pieces of clots and byproducts of conception that stained permanently the floor red. So So also on that night when I said I'd had an orgasm, I turned to my midwife then and said, I have to design a tub that works. And we started searching in the library, in the manufacturer's guidebooks. There was no internet. And I built my first tub out to be the size of my Volvo station wagon out of plexiglass so that it would fit in the back of the Volvo. And Binny had helped with the design, and we had it made by an aquarium manufacturer. But I couldn't ship it anywhere. It was just for local, but I drove it to Sacramento. I drove it to San Diego. And dropped it off. LA, it was in lots of LA homes. I met stars. I met, and then I woke up on the massage table one day and it goes, oh, UPS. We have to fit it into a box. And then comes the next version. I was still in Santa Barbara. I can see the house, and I started designing a tub then. And I did not have the money to sink into the inflatable designs, but I became the first distributor in the US of the most successful inflatable design, which is birth pool in a box. But it's actually in a bag that you put the bag in a box. But anyway, and I have one in my garage right now that I use for births locally. And we had a thriving manufacturing business and sales, rentals. We were in Portland, we were doing 25 to 30 births a month with the tubs. And I was going to births as well and doing midwifery. And that's when we saw each other in 2007 at the Gentle Birth World Congress.
Right. Joe Dispenza was there, and you brought Sarah Buckley over, and
Niels Bergman. And
was Niels there? Because I tracked him down in Cape Town a year or so later, and
Niels and Jill were there.
Mm-hmm.
I brought in everybody that I wanted to learn from, and we spent over $200,000 producing that conference, and over 11,000 people showed up in the conference hall at the expo, because it was only $1. It was $1 to get in. And parents came from as far as Seattle and came to that conference. It was incredible, but I went bankrupt over it. We still had another 200,000 in debt. So, but that was our first intentional water birth certification course. The midwife, or the physician from Minnesota, said, I've attended all your conferences. Can't you give me a certificate that says I know what I'm doing? And I said, well, let me get some credit. So I wrote to ACOG, I wrote to ACNM, and I paid the money for the credits. And we had about 60 doctors and midwives from all around the world take that course. There were doctors from Culiacan, Mexico. There were doctors from Argentina. There were doctors from Panama. There were doctors from Germany. They all came into that conference in 2007. And they all walked out with a certification as a water birth provider. And since that date, I've been upgrading and doing, and now it's all online. You can take the water birth certification course at 2:00 in the morning in Zimbabwe and receive your certificate. But prior to the online, I was circumnavigating the world, and Google would keep me informed. Google Maps would keep me informed. Last year, I went around the world 4.8 times, flying 177,000 air miles just on United and United Partners. And I taught the water birth certification in 19 countries in 1 year.
Wow.
And so the beginning in January of 2020, I had invitations from 17 countries. And I told my kids, I'm slowing down a little bit this year. And the first country that canceled was China. Actually, United, I had my flights to China for February, at the end of February, and they canceled the flight. And I thought, oh, something's up. And then Vietnam canceled. And then Panama canceled, and then Spain canceled, and then Israel canceled, and Egypt canceled, and Argentina canceled, and Mexico canceled, and Chile canceled, and Peru canceled. So I've been home ever since. And it was a gift because I never would have had the time to write the Essential Guide to Water Birth. And I never would have had the time dedicated for the online course. And the Essential Guide to Water Birth came out of the transcript from the course because I threw everything into it, and the baby and the bathwater. And it came out to be 18 and a half hours. And
this is a video series, or
it's 1 hour videos. It's 19 videos.
Mm-hmm.
And it's too long. So I'm now re-recording now that I know what I'm doing with Zoom. and I have better equipment and better lights and a new Macintosh computer on the way. My family has decided to fund me in my efforts. I never needed funding because I was supported by the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went from 6 figures a year to 0 in 2 weeks. And I applied for a COVID loan and haven't heard back from the government yet. Because Water Birth International had no, I've been doing some consulting, and a couple dozen people have taken the online course the way it is right now. And the evaluations have just been incredible. A physician from the Philippines said it changed my whole life. I have heard that over and over. We've passed over the 15,000 mark. 15,000 doctors and midwives have taken this course. And their whole life changes when they get permission to have hands off the baby. So, and then just think of the waves, the ripples that those 15,000 providers, you can have a water birth at Royal Hospital in Cairo from Dr. Kareem. Oh my God. And the cesarean birth rate in Cairo is 85%.
Wow.
And so I'm not just teaching a course on water birth. I'm teaching a course on how to humanely apply everything that you learn in this course to every birth that you attend. Because the sanctuary is the sanctuary. The womb is the perfect place to grow a fetus, and the sanctuary is the perfect place to grow a newborn, to wire their brains. They are made. The first biological imperative is to be born. The second biological imperative is to attach to a human breast.
Yeah.
And so the course, I have to continue teaching. And I was in a receiving line 6 years ago in Guadalajara. I was teaching at an invitation from the um, Americano-Mexico Hospital, from Dr. Frank and his whole group there. Just an amazing group of human beings. And they wanted to get water birth okay. And I was in this long receiving line, and this man came up at his turn, and he put his hands on my shoulders, and he pulled me in, and he said, "I am a Mayan shaman,
Mm.
and so are you. You heal with your words." And he whispered in my ear, he chanted, and my whole body had this electricity going through it, and I just started sobbing. Sobbing. And there is something that happens on a spiritual level when I'm teaching, when I can be in a whole room full of doctors, and by the third day they're shaking their heads and saying, "Oh my God, what have I done? What have I done?" Perinatologists, neonatologists, obstetricians, midwives, China. Oh my God, we don't have
Yeah,
time to talk about China, and it's time for your nap.
say a little bit about China for sure. I was going to ask you because that has been one of your biggest markets, hasn't it? And,
Well, I'm getting royalty checks from my Chinese edition of Gentle Birth Choices that actually support me.
hmm.
The Hang on 1 second.
And you can't even read it probably to know what it says.
I can read my name,
I
and
had a Japanese version of the wellness workbook and I have no idea what it said.
my son could read it.
Oh, okay.
He's fluent in Japanese. Um, yes, and I can read the words for mother, father, baby, birth. I have a limited vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
And I was standing in the um, Beijing airport. I had a 25-hour layover, 27-hour layover, and I went in the wrong line to go through immigration to get out. And when I discovered it, I was already through, and I couldn't get back out. And nobody was speaking English. No one. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning. I had a hotel reservation. I could not get out of the airport. And I started crying. I was really tired. I had come in from Malaysia, and I just had a layover, and then I was going home from Beijing. And I came up to an official in a uniform, and I said, uh, "Baba Chuli, Baba Chuli, baby go out, baby go out, Baba Chulaila, baby go out now." They tried to arrest me because I was this screaming idiot. The baby's coming now. The baby has to go out now.
Oh,
Bow, 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 chu, Lila means the baby's coming now. Or it can also mean the baby's going out now. And somebody finally came down and who spoke English, and I have to go out. And so in the course of the years, I have been in China every year for the last 15 years.
mm. And you've
Since,
seen a big transformation, I'm sure, in many ways.
well, My first invitation was 2005 to teach a course on water birth for the Chaoning Hospital in Shanghai. And it was Dr. Bao. And Dr. Bao is a woman. And the hospital in Shanghai, the Chaoning Hospital, it's very famous and everybody knows. And and I became famous because my friend Diane Garland and I went there and we taught this week-long course on the consciousness of newborns and water birth and the whole thing. And I came with videos and they said, we don't use videos anymore. We use DVDs, and we've transferred all your videos because we have copies of all your videos. We transferred them all to DVD. I didn't even have DVDs. Okay. This is intellectual property, mind you. But that hospital has had over 15,000 water births just in that one hospital.
Mm.
They invited me for their 5,000th one. 5,000.
Mm.
And they started an RCT at that hospital in 1990 or in 2005, but they abandoned it after 45 births because they said it's a violation of human rights.
Mm.
You know, everybody wants a water birth. So we had 200 doctors in that meeting, and those 200 doctors went out to all these other hospitals. But another hospital system, a private hospital system, hired me, the Baija system, and I call them pretend hospitals. They're yes, they're a hospital. Yes, they're doing births, but the obstetricians are in charge, and they're very medically oriented. And I've been in hospitals in so many cities in China that I start naming off the cities that I've been to Chinese people, and they said, that's more cities than I've been to in China. And so from the north to the south, to the east to the west, I've been on the border of Vietnam. I've been all the way to Mongolia. I've been on the border of Russia. And birth was and still continues to be horrendous, horrendous. As it was when I first went to Russia, when I first started doing programs in Russia. There's a Russian word, it's called harasho. Harashod. Harashod means good. Harashod. Очень хорошо. Very good. And when people in Russia would ask me how I was or what was going on, I would say, horror show, horror show. It was like stepping back into the 1950s.
Mm.
At least China has the technology, and that is the problem. China was the first one to manipulate the genes and to grow twins, genetically identical twins. They manipulated the genes. And so there are more, there's so much fertility, so many fertility clinics and things going on in China. But China is now leading the world in diabetes.
Mm.
When I first went to China in 2005, there were still horse carts in Beijing. There were millions of people on bicycles. You can't find a single bicycle downtown in China and in Beijing now.
Mm.
You can find Teslas, lots of Mercedes, and the hospitals have followed suit. The more technology, the better. The same thing in India. The more technology, the better. And I've been in hospitals in India where the cesarean birth rate is 100%. I've been in hospitals in Egypt, the cesarean birth rate is 100%. 100%. Because birth, vaginal birth, is so risky. And the same thing was going on in China, but thank God it's a communist country. It's a socialist country. And from the top down, they've made laws. You cannot have a cesarean rate higher than 70%, or else you get fined. And it started dropping. It started dropping. And they started hiring people like me to teach courses in the hospitals,
Mm.
to do seminars and week-long seminars and work on staff. And I would go in and dress in the scrubs and the headgear and the mask and the booties and deliver babies in Chinese hospitals and make them watch as a child went whoop and popped out.
Mm.
So I miss China desperately. There,
The C-section rates coming down, is it below 70%?
oh,
Yeah.
I've been in hospitals in major cities in China where the cesarean rate has dropped to 8%.
Mm. Wonderful.
And they increased the number of midwives. Midwifery
Mhm.
education has been there since the 1840s. And they've increased midwives. I have lectured in front of midwifery audiences of 5,000 to 6,000 midwives at a time.
Wow.
There's nothing like it. There's nothing like it.
Are there any home births in China?
Legally, no.
Mhm.
I have a list of home birth clients in China. Yeah.
Mhm.
And you know, the WeChat that the imposter in the White House has deemed irresponsible and wants to cut off. I chat with my colleagues in China every single day. I knew about COVID before any of you guys did.
Mhm.
I knew about it, you know, because my flight is canceled and I'm going, what the fuck?
Mhm.
And my colleagues in China were telling me, this is serious. There is death all around us in Wuhan, in Guangzhou, and they went on lockdown. They were on lockdown for straight 95 days. They couldn't leave their apartments, nothing.
Mhm.
And there was death everywhere in the hospitals. I'm talking about in the
Yeah.
hospitals. So it's been an interesting year.
What's happening with water birth in the U.S.?
I have new invitations from hospitals. We have about 10% of all U.S. hospitals have water birth protocols.
Really?
Mhm. Um, every major university hospital has a midwifery program that is doing water births. Harvard,
Wow.
Yale, University of Michigan, University of San Francisco, UC San Francisco, UC Davis.
Mhm.
Um, it's all over.
And you're
Yeah,
still selling tubs too, or is that
I
manufacturing?
I gave I stopped selling everything except education when I moved to Florida.
Oh, okay. Now,
Uh, I
who
sold
makes the tubs?
I sold my tub business to an organization called Waterbirth Solutions, and they promised to, because I sold it at a bargain basement rate, they promised to um, keep me uh, in, give me a small salary in perpetuity.
Hmm.
So for the rest of my life.
And
And mhm,
are
there's,
they're thriving? And what kind of sales?
I don't pay attention to that. Yes, they're in business, and I do refer a lot of people to them, but I don't take a cut of the business.
Hmm.
I just have a payout annually.
Hmm.
Um, and we have more tub manufacturers for hospital today than we ever did. Every major new hospital in um, Abu Dhabi and Dubai in the UAE, and even in Saudi Arabia, I've been in all those Middle East countries teaching, they all have tubs installed.
Hmm.
Every major hospital that's built is either remodeling or installing tubs. And the US, I just got an invitation to go somewhere. Oh my God.
Where and
Wisconsin,
when?
very small city in Wisconsin, small rural hospital. And there's another hospital in Milwaukee that just got $100,000 grant to buy equipment and train providers.
Mm.
So it is happening, and it has maintained a practice. Okay, where's the most water birth happening in all of the US? The Midwest.
Really?
Yep. Those down home folks that watch their pigs get born know the difference, know what's good. Yeah, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Um,
How
there's,
about Lima? Lima Memorial have one yet?
yes,
St. Rita's too?
St. Rita's too. Even St. Mary's Memorial Township Hospital has water birth. My hometown. And Salina, um,
I,
Coldwater.
I wonder if Bluffton does. The Finley Hospital bought the Bluffton Hospital where I was born.
Findlay Hospital was doing water births, and there were hospitals. Cleveland Clinics was, and University of Cleveland. But in 2014, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, along with AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics, published a statement that said water births should be considered um, an experimental procedure and only done after an RCT or during an RCT. And so many of the hospitals hired me to get their program started again. Abbott in Minnesota, university hospitals in Cleveland. I went around one summer and did a whole tour where they put yellow caution tape on their tubs. And I'm working with two researchers now, doing lots of meta-analyses of all of the pediatric literature that was all entirely hypothetical. It was entirely hypothetical. Like babies are going to drown, babies are going to get hyponatremia from swallowing so much water. They're all going to have drowning pneumonia. They're all going to die of Legionnaires. And yes, okay, there have been a few cases in the world. How many water births have we had in the world? We're well past 2 million. 2 million babies,
Mm-hmm.
well past that. China alone is going to probably supersede everybody. But I always tell people in my classes, water does not cause problems. Stupid people cause problems by making bad decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're at a good place. This next
I'm
10 years,
glad to hear it. That's
we're at a very
encouraging.
good place.
I have a question from way back when. Was it ever determined the cause of death for the baby Rose? That had anything to do with the birth? Hmm.
No.
You think that would have been an important part of the case?
Well, the couple had her cremated after 3 days
Mm.
and buried her under a rose bush in their garden.
Mm.
And he was from Australia, and they were so pursued in my case that they went back to Australia.
Mm.
They couldn't live in the U.S. with
Mm.
the medical establishment the way it was.
Yeah. Well, Barbara, this has been fantastic to find out so much more. I already knew you were an amazing, amazing woman, but to get these details and to capture them for future generations, this has been a wonderful gift. And thank
I
you.
I have never had the opportunity to bookend this from birth to now. So thank you, Jack, for the pleasure of telling my story.
Well, it's been my pleasure too. Any final parting words of wisdom before we stop the recording? Teach what we need to learn. I love that you share that with me.
Mhm. I always told my children that I wanted on my memorial stone, when you're Jewish, you get buried and then a year later they come back because they can think about you and say nice things about you and put on your memorial stone after 1 year. They don't just have to do it right then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I always told my children, I want on my memorial stone, at least she tried. And my children have individually and collectively said, no, Mom, you more than tried.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
persevered.
Wow.
You changed the way babies were welcomed into the world.
You certainly have. Thank you.
And all of those people that have helped me along the way, my first slide, whenever I teach, there's a long list of the influencers in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have enough time in a one-day workshop to list them all. But I stand on shoulders of great people.
Mm.
And I always wanted to be Sheila Kitzinger. I loved her so much. and
Oh
and
yeah.
I told her when she was 92, no, I'm sorry, when she was 82, I told her when she was 82, I said, you have to forgive me because when I got invited to tea at her house, I opened every drawer in her bathroom just to see what she kept in her drawers. And I felt so guilty about it for years. I didn't take a single thing. I just wanted to, today I would have taken pictures and
True
posted it on
confessions.
my Instagram account. But I was
Oh,
I was so starstruck.
ah.
And she, you know what she told me? She goes, I put my knickers on just like everyone else. And that's what I tell people who start crying the minute I shake their hand or hug them. And that happens in Mexico and South America and China. And my parting gift to who's ever going to see this in 30 years, I was in a large group in China, in Guangzhou, and it was all midwives. And I'd been with them for 5 days. And I made them do a circle. We do so many things to heal. And each person went around the room and it was their time to say how they were changed as a person, personally or professionally, it didn't matter, but what changed about you during this 5 days. And this woman who had been a midwife and a very famous midwife and in charge of a major hospital unit, she said, when I walked in the door, I knew what my job was. And that was to get the baby out as quickly as possible so the woman didn't suffer. And she said, and now I know that my job is to support this woman and to love her and to open my arms so that she can do what she needs to do and that the baby will be born through her effort and his effort. And all I have to do is hold that space.
Mm.
And then she just started weeping, which is so un-Chinese.
Yeah.
And she broke the circle and she ran across the room to the other side and she buried her head in my chest and just wept and wept and wept and wept.
Wow.
And the whole room was weeping.
Mm.
My interpreter couldn't speak.
I'm tearing up too, just to hear it.
And I was weeping and I leaned into her ear and I said, Wa'aini, Wa'aini, I love you.
Mm. What a great ending. Thank you. I'm going to end the recording now.